If you didn't know, the United Nations is basically a video game, and there's a whole meta for countries to come out on top. This is by Extra in Exile. He's got fantastic videos. Please go check him out. We're basically going to learn all about how the United Nations functions today. And well, spoiler alert, it's kind of a mess. So here we go. The United Nations
has 193
specifically
seats,
the General Assembly.
Kinda. And all of them get exactly one vote when they make decisions. Sovereign equality for the win.
Man, wait, there's a lot going on already in this first shot. I like how all these great country ball nations are voting between who would win, 1 million lions or the sun.
All of them get exactly one vote when they make decisions.
Everyone picks the sun.
Win. But, as you may know, the General Assembly isn't the UN's only organ. In fact,
there
are a bajillion of them.
Yes.
And not all of them agree that sovereign equality is all it's cracked up to be.
Yes, and then there's all these different classifications for different countries. It's going to get complicated, and everyone talks about the General Assembly, the Security Council. That's a whole nother metagame that I'm sure we're going to be talking about here.
Some organs allow countries that aren't even allowed in the General Assembly.
Yes.
Some organs restrict.
Yes, so there's the Kosovo question and Taiwan both being complicated. Everyone's given like different sort of categories essentially, because not everyone, like I just said, is recognized, and it gets really complicated.
Up to be. Some organs allow countries that aren't even allowed in the General Assembly. Some organs restrict how many members can be a part of it. And some organs require countries to work together to achieve even one single seat.
The lowland countries all working together? Oh, really? So the lowland countries have to work together to get to France's level? That's kind of funny.
The brawls over the seats of the various UN organs are part of what I like to call the UN seat metagame.
It's musical chairs.
Yes, I'm a gamer. How could you tell? Each organ has its own metagame that can tell us a lot about how countries navigate the world of international politics to put themselves in a good position. So let's go over some of those, starting with
the General Assembly. So we have a Street Fighter reference already right here at the very beginning. I loved when Street Fighter did this back in the day. So we're starting off with Japan. There's Thailand. There's Brazil. There's China.
Okay, so when I say one for each country, kinda, the kinda is the key word. While most of this map looks nice and blue, representing the entire world being part of the UN General Assembly, there are still some tiny little splotches of...
So we have Western Sahara, we have Palestine, what is that one over there? Christmas Islands?
Which have not joined the Cool Kids Club yet. There used to be many more of them, which the...
Yes, during the Cold War days.
The UN called trust territories and non-self-governing territories.
NSGTs. Remember, the UN formed out of the failed League of Nations. I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit here.
Declared all of them to be deserving of self-determination in Resolution 1514, which was adopted in 1960 alongside the mildly annoyed abstentions of the former colonial powers. And also the Dominican Republic.
Bruh thinks he's on the team.
He's on the team. Every single trust territory has since gained independence, with the final one having been Palau in 1994.
Wow, that's a while ago.
Great success for the UN Trusteeship Council. But of course, that also means that the Trusteeship Council is now completely unemployed. That's what you get for doing too good of a job. Always remember to quiet quits.
I think we're also going to be talking about the blue helmets, which is, a little, not even a little, pretty controversial as well.
Non-self-governing territories are a different story though. And today there are still 17 of them. There's an ongoing...
Is it mostly the US and the Brits, maybe the French that have things like this?
Struggle between the UN, which is urging the states who hold onto these territories to decolonize them, and the states giving reasons for why decolonizing them is unnecessary. We'll have to wait and see which side pulls ahead in that debate. But given as the UN has been chipping away at the former empires bit by bit, like a bowling ball knocking down a couple pins, perhaps they'll get a spare soon.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When the UN became a thing, there was a lot of decolonization that was also happening in the 50s and 60s. We have pretty much the loss of the British Empire, the French Empire, and then it was just the US and the Soviet Union at the time. During the Cold War, everything else was crumbling. So the UN had a whole lot of things going on at the same time.
From them, there are also the Cook Islands and Niue, which aren't non-self-governing territories and are actually eligible to join the UN whenever they want to. The reason why they haven't is because both of them have a deal of free association with New Zealand, giving their citizens automatic citizenship in New Zealand. But New Zealand is planning on taking away those citizenship rights if the Cook Islands or Niue were to join, which is a bit too big of a blow for them to take. So for now, they enjoy sitting under New Zealand's umbrella. The last batch of...
I wonder why New Zealand... Why New Zealand? New Zealand always loves to be... I feel like everyone gives New Zealand as being this nice nation, but... As we know, studying different things of around the world, geopolitics, there's not necessarily anything, there's not any such thing as like a good, nice nation. They all got something kind of funky going on.
States that are still trying to get UN membership are the observer states. But observers aren't just states,
I think
but
it's
also international
the
organizations like the European Union, intergovernmental organizations like
the African Union. Is ASEAN a part of that? The Vatican, I think, is an observer state, I believe.
African Union, and various NGOs. Observers aren't full members of the General Assembly, given as they can't vote on resolutions, but they do.
Man, the fact that I have yet to come across like a video that actually tries to explain all of the complicated aspects of the UN in this way. This is great.
Get some privileges that non-members don't have. There are 2 observer states, Palestine
there
and
it
the
is.
Holy See. The Holy See, which is like the Catholic Church, kinda, and Vatican City, kinda. We don't have time for any of that. It's pretty much universally recognized by the full UN members, but it doesn't really care to become a member. The Lateran Treaty, which it signed with Italy in 1929, states that the Holy See must be neutral in international matters, which it still upholds. Not that they would get very far if they wanted to become a member anyway, because they'd need a recommendation from the Security Council, which
Why did I think the Vatican here, or is this supposed to be the Pope ball in a way? I thought he was going to be playing like a Paradox game, like EU4 or something like that. That would definitely be the Vatican's favorite Paradox game, because the papacy was doing pretty good in those times.
Fortunately for them, contains the People's Republic of China, which the Holy See does not recognize, but can of course veto away the recommendation. Speaking of observer states whose recommendations tend to get vetoed away, it's Palestine. Contrary to the Holy See, Palestine does want to become a General Assembly member. Desperately. Since the UN consists of states, being part of the UN would give Palestine indirect recognition as a state, even if some states don't recognize them. So becoming a General Assembly member is a big deal to Palestine.
Yeah, let's be real. That's problem. Unless some things change drastically in the world, it's probably not going to happen. I just don't see it happening.
Palestine needs to pass 2 hurdles. The second hurdle is to get a 2/3 majority vote in the General Assembly. That one's simple. In May of 2024, the GA passed Resolution ES-10/23, which
typically the US and Israel vote very similarly in a lot of these UN votes.
not only expanded Palestine's rights as an observer, but also urged the Security Council to seriously consider Palestinian membership. Pretty please. 143 states voted in favor, above the 100.
Lots of I don't knows in there too. Wow, Afghanistan voted I don't care. That's interesting.
128.66 repeating states that would be required if a vote on Palestinian membership were to ever be held. The first hurdle, however, is to get that dang recommendation from the Security Council in the first place, which is not really a hurdle, but more like a tungsten wall. Every single recommendation of Palestinian membership that has gotten into the Security Council has been vetoed away by the United States. And they're not exactly intending to stop anytime soon.
Yeah.
In the General Assembly metagame, the observers are C tiers. They can pull off some gimmicks, but are generally not strong.
Well, at least they got more power than Taiwan here, I'm guessing. RIP, 1971.
As for the 193 countries that are in the GA, the metagame is a lot more equal. Like I said, every country gets one vote. And also, its resolutions usually aren't binding, and merely show what the general consensus about...
Is Sealand, the random oil rig in the English Channel, did they get any votes? Oh wait, Zealand is right there. That's Sealand, right? That's crazy. I didn't... Is that why I subconsciously put them in my head? Oh no, I'm sorry. I was gonna say that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, their flag is a little bit different, although very similar, I guess.
But every country in the GA metagame in B tier or something. That works.
Yeah, the S tier, that Security Council,
now
right?
Now that you know how UN membership works, I suggest the nation of Exilia.
I was going to say, this makes you really want to start my own nation. I mean, one whole vote out of only 193 votes, well, then it would be 194, right, if I have my own nation. If we form our own Durnil empire, that's one whole vote. Probably not going to go that far, but still kind of cool.
Try joining. Well, by joining the UN, we must automatically ratify the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which contains the right of freedom of movement, allowing me to escape exile.
Nice.
Wait, why did I say that? So you hate human rights?
No, I hate you specifically.
Fine, want to form an MUN then? Model United Nations. You know, they take on the roles of certain countries and act as if we're that country at the UN.
Sounds boring, but yeah, okay.
Let's test it out with...
Ooh, more fighting game? Oh, is this Smash? It's Smash Bros! Oh, I love that Panama right there. Panama, Pakistan... Who is that? Who DK is Denmark, possibly? Donkey Kong? Somalia? Is that Diddy Kong?
Besides the General Assembly, the Security Council is probably the most well-known organ of the United Nations, and arguably the one that gets the most stuff done. You know, ignoring approving Palestine.
So there's also this, the Security Council, if I remember correctly, has, random people that get invited every so often, every couple years. Is that why Algeria is there?
Membership.
There's permanent members, and then there's, rotating members, if I believe so. He's obviously going to get into it.
And arguably the one that gets the most stuff done. You know, ignoring approving Palestinian members.
I think there's 5 permanent members: the USA, the UK, Russia, France, China.
Being the organ that has all the power to prevent conflict and impose sanctions on states means that being a member of the Security Council is an incredibly desirable position.
Probably
also
S tier.
because you might even get some cash for helping a great power pass an important resolution. But, you know, it's best to keep quiet about that. So desirable that in 1979, it took the General Assembly 154 rounds of voting to decide whether they should send Cuba or Colombia to the Security Council, with each round sluggishly inching forward in Cuba's favor until it peaked in round 123, with 91 out of the 98 required votes.
That's fascinating. Wait, what year was this? Because remember, Cuba was pretty controversial back in those days, if I'm remembering correctly. 1979. So yeah, this is way beyond the embargo. So obviously, well, I guess that's why the U.S. is on, this is Venezuela's side, and the USSR at the time was on Cuba's side.
Assembly 154 rounds of voting to decide whether they should send
Colombia,
Cuba.
My bad. Yeah, I was going to say Venezuela. That'd be ironic just because of what's been going on with Venezuela as of recently.
Or Colombia to the Security Council, with each round sluggishly inching forward in Cuba's favor until it peaked in round 123, with 91 out of the 98 required votes, until falling off again, which is when the two decided, okay, no, this is ridiculous, just give it to Mexico instead. The reason why such a fight even occurred was because the Security Council only has 15 seats for the 193 countries that are able to occupy them. And unfortunately for most countries, the seats are slim pickings. Not only are just 10 out of the 15 seats available to them.
Yes, so I was correct. Well, a part of it is just the animation. So great and be able to show and represent what exactly is going on. But it's China, France, Russia, the UK, and the USA that have the permanent seats. And then this is like rotating, I believe.
With the other 5 being reserved for the permanent members, they can also only get a seat that's entitled to the regional group they're in.
Oh,
the African
regional
group gets 3, the Asian Pacific group gets 2, the Latin American...
So interesting, China is not, well, obviously China's not a part of it because they've got one of the permanent seats, but Asia Pacific, Latin America, this is interesting to see the way the UN divides up the world. Notice there's no Western Sahara here. Very curious. So 2 for Asia, 3 for Africa, and let's just see the rest.
And Caribbean group gets 2, the Western European and others group gets 2, and the Eastern European group gets 1.
The Eastern European, okay. Now, I'm assuming some of these, this is kind of complicated. It's definitely, it matters obviously who has the permanent seats. There's a lot of European representation here. France, Russia, and the UK all representing Europe. And then this is Europe. So Europe gets these 2 seats, and then Eastern Europe specifically gets 1 up here. All right, I guess interesting. There's like 51 or 52 or 53 nations in Africa. So I'm guessing that's why they have 3 different spots here. Maybe, I feel, what side is, this can't be that proportionate. I feel like there's probably some math problems with some of these, but I'm not sure.
Since countries occupy a seat for 2 years, if you're part of the Eastern European group and a seat went to someone else...
That seems like a pretty good spot to be, although there's a lot of nations in the Balkans. But yeah, you can be a pretty small nation in the Eastern European group. First of all, that's the UN's definition of it. Everyone gets real mad when you throw out Eastern European and you include countries that, that they don't consider to be Eastern European. Like Czechia, I think, does not classify themselves, or Poland doesn't classify themselves as Eastern European, but this was probably defined back in the Cold War days.
For 2 years, if you're part of the Eastern European group and a seat went to someone else, have fun waiting out that full term to get another chance. But fear not, for countries can always take advantage of the meta. In order to get into the high tiers of the Security Council non-permanent members, you need...
Yeah, India and Pakistan. India is a big one to be left off the list. You would think the most populated country, they'll probably get a permanent seat, I would assume, but we'll see.
To prove that you are willing and committed to maintaining security in the world.
Stop fighting.
Well, the SC often organizes peacekeeping missions in various areas of the world where conflicts could possibly resurface.
Cyprus.
So, countries that either send troops, aka Blue Helmets, or support the mission financially are more likely to gain favor in the General Assembly.
That's why these Blue Helmets are so complicated. They're being sent around by different countries for, well, incentives and things like that. So, Bangladesh, interesting.
Allowing them to get elected to the SC. It's no surprise then that Japan has been appointed to the SC the most besides the permanent members, as they're the...
Japan has sent a lot of peacekeeping measures. They've been trying to do that after World War II, considering what they did in World War II, you know.
Third largest financial contributor to peacekeeping operations.
His first year was 1958, though.
And the largest if you ignore the 2 permanent members above them. Italy, Germany, and Canada also get elected a lot for the same reason. On the other side of the coin, India and Pakistan benefit a lot from sending some of the most blue helmets out of any country. But
Well, India's got a lot of people. I mean, that certainly helps.
oftentimes they don't even beat Nepal, Bangladesh, or Rwanda in the amount of troops they send.
Wow, ranking contributions by country. It's Nepal, Rwanda, Bangladesh. That's amazing. Considering India's got 1 billion people, this is crazy that Rwanda is beating them out, or Nepal. Indonesia also pretty low on the list considering they also proportionally have a lot of people living there.
Though
Pakistan's
they're
got 250,000.
mostly doing so because they get paid a
Quarter
lot
billion.
for it. Same for many other developing countries. Or sometimes they have more malicious motivations, but seriously, we don't
How Rwanda leverages peacekeeping for influence. Ooh, man, this is getting complicated. There really is like a deep metagame going on here.
have time for that. Countries like those make up the high tiers. So if another country is looking to get elected for the SC, they might copy their strategies and increase the amount of money or blue helmets they send to peacekeeping
Ethiopia and
operations,
Sweden.
depending on which works best for them. So it goes without saying that if you want to end up in F tier, you need absolutely no one to trust your ability to keep the world peaceful and secure.
So North Korea. It's got to be North Korea. But China would vote for North Korea.
See Afghanistan, North Korea,
Oh.
Israel,
I guess that's not an okay. So as long as the permanent members, UN members that have never been Security Council members. Oh my goodness. Afghanistan never imagine seeing North Korea or Afghanistan as like Security Council members. That's crazy.
Eritrea, and worst of all, Iceland.
Oh, really?
I mean, just look at the codwords. They're clearly preparing for world domination.
That's funny.
But the best way to get into the high tiers of the Security Council metagame, even the S tier, is to not even have to play.
Yeah.
The other 5 of the 15 seats belong to the permanent members who are on the Security Council forever.
This definitely leans a certain way, clearly. There's 3 out of 5 of these are kind of aligned in a way, you know, the US, France, and the UK versus China and Russia. I mean, they all have their problems in between each other, but I see one very clear side with the US, France, and the UK versus China and Russia, but
You know them. Whether or not you love them is up to your own opinion. It's the US, China, Russia, Britain, and France. The 5 permanent members are also the ones who have the power of veto, which means that if any of them say no to a resolution, regardless of how many other countries voted yes, that resolution is going straight into the trash.
yeah, and it's very often, the US, or if it's more of the China-aligned world, then China will, veto, and I think this is part of the reason why a lot of people think the UN gets nothing done.
The veto is a very controversial aspect of the Security Council, since it has a tendency to completely block progress on a certain topic if a great power feels like it. At this point though, it's literally impossible to get rid of it. Any change to the veto system that weakens it, it's gonna have to go through the Security Council, which is obviously going to veto the change. Rats. So if a nerf to the veto isn't possible, then perhaps we can still change the Security Council structure with DLC.
We essentially need like an alien invasion to get the UN to all agree on something, more than likely. That's pretty much it. Alien invasion, or I guess a pandemic.
Or, an expansion. You see, there's an ongoing debate about whether or not to increase the amount of permanent and non-permanent members. The main backers of that idea are Brazil, Germany, India, and Japan.
Yeah, I can see why those countries specifically would want an expansion pack. I can understand India. Brazil's a rising power. Back in the day, in the early days of the UN, obviously Japan and Germany were rebuilding. Dang, they're still being punished for being Axis members, clearly.
All of whom think that they should be given permanent member status. Collectively, they are known as a Group of 4, or G4. And these are the suggestions in their joint proposal made in 2000.
It's a very interesting group of nations, for sure. I think the most likely would be India, right? But we'll see.
5. The 4
They're going to have to start contributing a bit more, I'm guessing. They're not contributing as much as Nepal, so they got to figure that out.
of them get a permanent seat at the SC, alongside 2 permanent seats for the African group, and there will also be
Yeah, how would you change the rotation and these different categories? That's the only thing. If you do invite the group of 4 or whatever, and then would that mean that there's only 6 rotating seats left? So a lot of the rest of the world probably do not want more permanent seats because that lessens their chances. So this is just a complicated mess.
4 more non-permanent seats.
What a mess.
Lastly, the new permanent members won't immediately get the power of veto, because there's no way the current permanent members would agree to that. So
Yeah, that's the thing. You could rotate the permanent members, which defeats the purpose of a permanent member. I get that. That's stupid, Drew. But maybe you have a rotation of between like the 9 that get to sit. Oh, the US would never, ever vote for that. I mean, none of the 5 would ever be okay with that. So I don't know how you fix it.
So let's just kick that can down the road and discuss it in about 15 years. Though their demands are linked to each other, not all of them have the same level of support from the veto holders.
Yeah, there's going to be certain... Obviously, the U.S. is going to align with Germany and Japan. China and Russia might be more cool with India, Brazil. It all depends.
France and Britain have already agreed to the proposal. France even co-sponsored the demands.
Why? Interesting. That's an interesting one. I feel like maybe he'll get into it, but if there are countries that are in these permanent seats that if we had to get rid of some, I feel like you'd have to get rid of France and the UK, maybe Russia. I mean, China and the USA, those are two pretty dominant powers right now.
Continuing the trend of those two not really doing anything with their veto power ever since the Cold War ended.
Makes sense.
Brazil and India have the most support. Since being members of BRICS, an economic group...
That's what I thought. I thought we were going to go back to BRICS. So that is why China and Russia are going to support India and Brazil to come in. I don't think China and Russia are going to be as cool with Germany and Japan, but let's see.
Russia and China are also parts of, gets them support from those two, while the US doesn't really have a strong opinion.
It's going to switch.
Germany is next, having the support of the US,
so they're going to be
while
happy.
Russia and China don't have strong opinions.
Yep.
Japan has it the worst though, because despite the US supporting them and Russia being neutral, getting China to show them any compassion will take a geopolitical miracle.
I wonder why. Is this purely, I mean, it's probably not purely based off of the grudge of World War II, but obviously China still definitely holds that. They do not like, and they remember what the Japanese Empire did to the Chinese, but there's probably more things going on behind that. First of all, China is sitting pretty as the only Asian power with that permanent Security Council seat. You definitely wouldn't want Japan because Japan would not be voting in favor of China for anything.
That said though, if the Security Council gives the G4 nations their permanent member status in, let's say patch 3.0, because 2.0 already happened, regardless of whether
1965 was patch 2.0? That's the last time we got patched, bro?
Patch 3.0, because 2.0 already...
1965, members before election, new members. Oh, okay. Argentina, Bulgaria, Japan, Mali, Uganda. Oh, wow.
Happened. Regardless of whether or not they get a veto, they're shooting up into the S tier. And you know what that means? It's meta centralization. Why bother being any of these suckers in the A tier if there are so many good characters to choose from in the S tier?
It's funny because I can argue for China and Russia here why the 5 is, like, you'd either want to expand it or something. Because, like, as I said, these permanent members definitely leans 3 out of 5. I think it leans one way in terms of the sphere of power, the power dynamic or struggle that's going on in the world currently right now.
This shall not stand. And so, in response to the formation of the G4, another group formed in opposition to their bid.
Oh my goodness, why does this keep going? It gets more and more complicated. So South Korea, I can see why South Korea, if Japan gets, chosen, then why not? Oh man, this new 5 doesn't seem as, but yeah, okay, so they're like rivals that have formed from the G4. You got Pakistan, India's rival. You got Italy, who's not necessarily Germany's rival, but if Italy's going to be like, well, if Germany's there, what about me? Turkey's just there, South Korea and Japan. And then Argentina, Brazil. Wow, these literally are a lot of like direct rivals, regional rivals in the continent and things like that.
On to the formation of the G4, another group formed in opposition to their bid, uniting for consensus. They also want to enlarge the SC, but in a much different way, wanting 10 extra non-permanent members and 0 extra permanent members. The reason why Uniting for Consensus wants to prevent the G4 from becoming permanent members becomes obvious once you look at its members.
Here it is. That's literally what I was trying to get over. You have direct regional rivals. Italy and Germany, maybe not so much, but yeah. Turkey probably sees Germany as the same way, though. Turkey's like, well, if Germany's being thought about, what about me?
Uniting for Consensus wants to prevent the G4 from becoming permanent members becomes obvious once you look at its members. While the G4 nations are dominant powers in their respective regions, the UFC members are almost dominant powers in those same regions.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
And so they want to prevent the G4 nations from becoming too powerful. That's Canada, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina against Brazil, Spain, Italy.
I mean, it's funny because all these powers, would argue you've got like American countries that are trying to, at least dominate they're trying to fight for that second place position behind the U.S. in the American continents. I think Brazil's probably, it's got a very, big emerging economy. But then there's Mexico too. Let's get into the other
powerful.
regions.
That's Canada, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina against Brazil, Spain, Italy, and Turkey against Germany,
Oh, was Spain included? I actually didn't see Spain in the previous diagram or
Pakistan
whatever.
against India,
Yeah.
and South Korea against Japan. Oh yeah, and there's also Malta and Costa Rica. They're also there.
Wow.
Even if the 5 veto holders agree to the G4 nations becoming permanent SC
Everyone
members,
else is gonna say no.
remember what we talked about earlier, they still need to get a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly.
Oh.
And let's just say the UFC has a bone to pick with that idea. They
Damn.
have a real chance of rallying all of the other UN members to block them, especially if they get the support of China, which actually likes the UFC much more than the G4. Like, yeah, sure, India isn't BRICS with us, but like, do we really want to give one of our biggest geopolitical enemies more power?
Good point. Really good point. Yeah, I mean, that people forget that BRICS has got a lot of internal struggles. Like, BRICS is just unification to be like, hey, screw the US dollar. But when you actually go a little bit deeper into Brazil, Russia, India, those are the big ones. But then there's also Brazil and South Africa. But yeah, India, China, and Russia, those three all have really, they all border each other. Got some weird power struggles going on.
Yeah, no. Why don't you go play with your good pal Pakistan at the non-permanent member table?
Yeah, and China probably has a lot of different relations with the other members outside of that big four.
Don't worry, he won't bite. And so the current Security Council metagame
He's got
stays the
nukes.
same, but radical tier shifts may happen in the future. That's because informal groups like the G4, UFC, or BRICS have a pretty large impact on decision
So weird to call it UFC. I keep thinking we're talking about like fighting Ultimate Fighter or something like that.
making in the UN, even if they usually aren't seen as being as powerful as formal organizations. The power of informal groups is a trend you're gonna notice throughout every UN organ. Now, since the resolutions of the Security Council are binding, allow me, as the Security Council President, to put forward a motion that allows Extra to leave exile whenever he pleases. I vote in favor.
I veto the resolution.
Darn, he's good.
Oh, is this why am I forgetting this fighting game? We had Street Fighter, we had Brawl. This is I played this one before. Capcom?
The Economic and Social Council exists to discuss economic and social issues.
Wow.
But actually, we're not even gonna talk about it. ECOSOC itself is kinda weak, so it doesn't really matter too much which countries are in it, and thus its metagame isn't really in-depth. What is important about ECOSOC, however, is that it serves as an umbrella for a bunch of specialized agencies. And while those agencies don't discuss political issues per se,
This is basically just making me realize like, oh, this is why the UN is like at a complete standstill, complete stalemate, and it's been like that for so long. Like it's just frozen, and it's frozen in line. It's gonna take a long time before these forces like one side gives basically.
they are still politicized, and so can have an impact on politics. I want to look at one of these organizations specifically, the International Monetary Fund, because I personally think it has one of the most interesting metagames. The IMF's executive board's main purpose is to prevent an economic crisis,
Oh, poor
which they
Greece.
do by lending money to countries who get themselves into debt. That money has to come from somewhere though, and for the most part it comes from the other member states. Each country pays a certain fee to be part of the IMF, which is called a quota. The stronger a country's economy, the higher their quota, and thus the more they pay.
Ooh.
Uh-oh, that sounds like a scam. But it's not really. You see, so far the only voting systems we've talked about have been simple. One country equals one vote, albeit with or without a veto. But if that system was used in the IMF, that would be awful for the richer countries, because they have to pay so much to be a part of it and then they don't even get compensated for it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, so like a nation like Cambodia is not going to have to pay nearly as much as the Netherlands in this example.
So the IMF does not use a one country equals one vote system, but instead, the quota also decides a country's voting power.
Oh.
Wow.
Oh, wow. That is an interesting balance mechanic. So the US, this is why they have so much power, because they're more than likely paying the most to the IMF.
Looks like a metagame instantaneously formed based on each country's economic
There's
power.
literally a gap because the US is so high up here.
With the United States as the most powerful economy holding a whopping 16.49% of the votes, which is approximately 32 times their voting power in the General Assembly, where they only
Jeez.
get 1 out of 193 votes. It's so ridiculously high that an 85% supermajority, which is required to make changes to the voting system, is literally impossible to achieve without the US voting in favor.
So they basically own the UN, which I'm not surprised to see.
The actual fuck? So yeah, while the
Looting
to achieve without the US voting in favor. What the actual
Looting target is un-American. The real American thing is to do looting.
Actual fuck. So yeah, while the voting system does make sense given the quota payments, the other countries obviously aren't the biggest fans of this arrangement. However, they can't change the voting system to reduce the US's power since they would simply say no. So they have to do the next best thing. Unionize. Kinda. The executive board
I was going to say, what if they just pay more? Could they do that? I don't know if you'd want to do that.
Doesn't actually contain all IMF members. It only contains 25 of them. But several groups of countries rally behind the director of another, giving that country all of their voting power. And that country does the decision making for all countries they represent. This means that the whole world has been split up into 25 pieces, which also tells us a little bit about which countries are on the same wavelength.
Oh my gosh, my mind is about to explode. This is a very interesting breakdown of the world. I don't think I've seen the IMF's breakdown of the US. Why does Canada get their own little of the world? Why does Canada get their own little section? Latin America's weirdly dotted, like Nicaragua's doing its own thing. Panama, then the Hispaniola Island. There's so much to
preventing economic crises. Some of these groups are to be expected.
Nordics.
There's a Nordic bloc.
That makes sense.
A Southeast Asian bloc. A Southern Asian bloc. An Arab bloc. And a
the what bloc?
Nordic bloc. A Southeast Asian bloc. A Southern Asian bloc, an Arab bloc, and a South American bloc.
South American bloc that doesn't include half of South America, but okay.
And then
Spanish-speaking, but there's also Spanish-speaking countries that are not there.
7 of the 25 don't even have to work together with anyone because their voting powers are high enough as is. But then there are those little peculiarities on the map, which really makes you think about what went on behind the negotiating table to form these groups. Canada leads a bloc of mostly Anglophone countries, which includes Ireland. Spain and Mexico share a bloc with common Spanish colonies.
Ah, that makes sense. Oh, so they're grouping together some old colonies. Look at Spain and Mexico having to work together.
Histories.
Sure, they don't love that.
Brazil takes the leftover American scraps, and also Timor-Leste and Cape Verde, which were Portuguese colonies.
That's hilarious that Brazil is leading former Portuguese colonies at this point because poor Portugal, holy crap.
It's just like Brazil. Portugal itself is part of Italy's bloc, united by Mediterranean.
Interesting, and Spain's doing their own thing. Oh yeah, so this is like southern Mediterranean nations, Greece, Italy, Portugal.
Culture. Since Europe has plenty of strong economies, they're able to be a lot more picky with who they team up with to get.
Is Switzerland and Serbia in their own bloc? That's crazy. And with Poland, or are those just, they had to reuse colors?
High enough voting power. That means that the other 2 European blocs we haven't discussed yet are just complete messes.
Yeah.
You've got a Dutch and Belgian bloc, as well as an Austrian and Turkish bloc.
What the hell is even this?
Something interesting though is that Kosovo is in that latter bloc, despite them not being recognized as one of the UN's 193 main members.
That is interesting.
Though Serbia and Russia resisted their inclusion, since the US, and by extension Western Europe, have most of the votes in the IMF due to their economic strength, they were able to pull Kosovo in. Being enemies of the US also explains why the likes of Cuba, Venezuela, Western Sahara, Palestine, Afghanistan, and North Korea are not in the IMF.
That's what I figured. I saw a couple of that. Yeah, so if the US doesn't like you, you're really screwed. If that's not obvious enough, but even in a different way, UN way.
So does that also mean that Serbia and Russia are in the same bloc? No, actually. Russia only pools their votes together with one other country, and it's not even in the former Soviet Union.
Whoa.
Can you guess who it is?
No. Russia and no one in the former Soviet Union? Belarus. It's Belarus.
Syria.
No, I would have never guessed that. Holy crap, that's funny. I mean, I do know, well, it's awkward now because Syria kicked out Assad. So is that still the case?
Boy, I'm sure recent geopolitical developments will definitely not make this IMF relationship incredibly awkward for both parties. It would be sad if it wasn't incredibly funny. But then who do Serbia, Poland, and Switzerland team up with? Central Asia. Sure.
I wasn't sure. I was like, what are all these risks? I did not think that they were putting Central Asia. I saw that Switzerland, Serbia, and maybe Poland were a part of a group, and I'm like, no. That red cannot be the same red, but here we are. It is the same red. I don't know what they're doing.
Kinda like this block because Liechtenstein and Uzbekistan, the 2 double landlocked countries, are teaming up.
That is pretty funny.
The African bloc...
It does seem like they try to put like an economic power with some of the more kind of lower tier. That sounds messed up, but... Well, let's see about here in these parts of Africa, because that's going to be a big factor.
Are a lot bigger than the European ones because they don't have similarly strong economies.
Yeah.
So they have to be a lot less picky when teaming up.
It does seem like there's like 1 to 2 leaders of each block economically that are really taking, and then those 2 leaders kind of carry the rest of the team.
South Africa leads a squad of Southern African countries.
South Africa's doing among the best in so what are the other ones? Well, Egypt is in the Arab League. You got Ethiopia, maybe Nigeria.
While the Central African bloc is...
Oh, look at the DRC. They're doing great right right here.
Up more evenly spread, with the DRC having the highest voting power. This is unfortunately also the weakest bloc in the executive board despite its size. Nigeria is in charge of a
voting power, not economics, but
an African bloc, which surprisingly does not contain Ghana. Ghana instead partners up with the northern African countries, alongside Iran and Pakistan. And lastly, there's a Pacific bloc, which also includes
Mongolia and South Korea for whatever reason. This is a complete mess. You know what this is reminding me of? This is reminding me of in like professional sports leagues, for instance, like the NFL. They have like no concept of geography. They just throw whatever team in the AFC South or AFC West, even if they aren't even in the South or the West. It's just like that.
Mongolia and the Seychelles, because they needed some friends too. These are genuinely some of the most bizarro pairings of countries I've ever seen.
They are.
And it pains me that I don't know what happened behind the scenes that formed them in the first place.
I wish
but
we could be a fly on the wall.
thanks to these pairings, the IMF metagame is a bit more balanced and allows the smaller countries to also have a say. But considering the Kosovo example from earlier, the metagame is definitely in the West's favor. It's why...
Oh, that was... I've been every single, like, I've been taking little mental notes of, like, all the things that are in the West's favor, and that's, yeah.
Once again, informal groups want to challenge it. BRICS already pushed to reform the quota system in 2010 to give emerging economies more voting power, which the US reluctantly agreed to in 2015, as long as they could keep their 16% vote share. BRICS has also made their own institution called the New Development Bank, which acts similarly to the IMF and the World Bank, but without the dominance of the US and other Western powers. And with more countries having joined BRICS in 2024, it looks like the will to challenge the West's economic power is growing internationally. Could this massively shake up the metagame?
Makes sense.
Maybe. I don't know. I can't predict the future, man. And
it is, I mean, this is literally a race that's going on. It kind of explains a lot of the geopolitics that are going on currently.
You know what else will massively shake up our metagame? This fat stack of cash right here.
Where'd you even get that?
I took out a loan from the IMF.
Nice. How?
Oh,
we're not even
you hear? They sent an email inviting us right after we finished our MUN meeting where we played as a Security Council.
Nice.
They praised us for our realism regarding the usage of the veto power. Alright then, time to use this money to call an Uber and get me out of this place. Man, inflation's rough these days. While we wait for that to arrive, let's talk about one more metagame.
Yugoslavia. We got some old ones here. Ukraine, Honduras. Is Honduras got like is that like a paddle or something? The International Court of Justice. Oh boy.
Metagames aren't always about tier lists. Character matchups also play an important role. You know, the US may be S tier, but put them in the ring against Vietnam and let's just call that an upset. But war is not tolerated at the UN. So instead, countries will have to 1v1 in court. The International Court of Justice is the UN organ that settles all kinds of legal disputes. On the surface, the ICJ has the exact same metagame as the General Assembly. It has the exact same 193 members.
I don't know why I just had this random thought. I really wish I was like a citizen of one of these kind of smaller, just anything but the US, honestly, because it's such a big, like it'd be fun to be like, maybe not Rwandan, but like from the Gambia. Can you send me, if I was like a Gambia citizen, can I get sent to the UN? How exactly do you get that role? You got to be probably friends with some pretty higher ups.
States. And since all 15 judges of the court have to be completely neutral regardless of their nationality.
That's my pivot to out of YouTube one day, hopefully just become like a diplomat or something like that. I've unironically tried to look into that. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that.
It's not like any country can gain a political advantage by having one of their judges serving. An applicant country can simply challenge a respondent country by claiming they've broken international law. And if they accept, it becomes a contentious case. This makes the battleground pretty even, all things considered. No items, Fox only, final destination. If the applicant wins, then the court punishes the respondent and makes them pinky promise to never break the law again. And if the respondent wins, then the applicant is told to shut up. You know, that, but in legal mumbo-jumbo.
Oh, wow.
Who needs wars when you can watch states settle their differences in an epic saga of legal cases?
That is kind of cool.
It provides all the drama you need.
That is kind of cool. Why is everyone obsessed with like murder cases? Bro, I want to see two countries go head to head, people screaming at each other in the courtroom in their own respective languages too.
But when I say, on the surface, the ICJ has the exact same metagame as the General Assembly. The on the surface is the key word. Shut up.
Those are 3 words.
Since both parties agree to the 1v1, if the court finds that the respondent has indeed broken international law, they are forced to comply with the court's ruling, often having to pay reparations. If the respondent doesn't comply, then it's the Security Council that's supposed to enforce the ruling. And that's where the main issue of the ICJ lies. Let's take one of the contentious cases currently in progress as an example. Ukraine v Russia. It's about Russia claiming that Ukraine is committing a genocide in Donetsk and Luhansk, justifying Russia's invasion, special military operation. Ukraine submits a claim against Russia saying, "Nuh-uh, we're not
Why is this not live streamed? Or is it just doesn't get enough attention? Maybe that's the case.
committing genocide." And also, no, you're planning a genocide.
No, you hit him with the
Let's
reverse
consider a
Uno
future
card.
in which Ukraine wins the case. Good day to you, Russian Federation. You have lost the case that Ukraine filed against you and must immediately stop your invasion and pay reparations. I disagree. Well, since you appear to be non-compliant, I must unfortunately bring this case in front of the United Nations Security Council in order to enforce the ruling of the International Court of Justice. Hello, Security Council members. We have convened today to vote on a resolution to enforce the International Court of Justice's ruling on the Russian Federation. Please cast your votes. I veto. The resolution has not been adopted, owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I shall now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the voting. Yes, actually, I want to make a statement. What the fuck? Democracy is dead. And it's not just the 5 veto holders who enjoy this kind of protection, because they might also cast their veto to protect an important ally. Looking at another ongoing case, for example,
I like these drawing
South Africa
France
v.
now.
Israel, in which South Africa claims that Israel is breaking the 1948 Genocide Convention by
Oh, that's right. I
committing
did hear
genocide
about this.
against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. For now, the court has only asked Israel to comply by some provisional measures, but if Israel loses the case, when Israel loses the case,
Ooh.
they could refuse to comply and have the US veto any Security Council resolution that spawns from it, arguing
probably
that
will.
Israel is acting in self-defense.
They definitely will.
Even the most neutral of institutions aren't immune from international politics.
So again, man, those top 5 5 spots, it really feels like they have all the power.
You'd best be at the top of that metagame.
Yeah. That S tier is serious.
Oh hey, my Uber is here, so I guess it's time for me to go. Well then, EBM, my time here has been truly horrendous. There's no but. Goodbye.
Not so fast.
Huh?
Oh, is there going to be actually fighting? I'm going to make sure you stay exiled. And to do that, I'm taking you to the International Court of Justice. Let's fight in the courtroom.
You know, according to the ICJ's rules, I don't actually have to agree to this.
Oh, do it for the content.
You're right. I accept your challenge.
So exile is like Napoleon in this universe. Exiled into Elba. Nice. With a hammer and everything. Oh, war crime tribunal.
You think?
That's going to be a messy one. Wow, that was a fantastic video. Please go check out Extra in Exile. I've seen many videos kind of trying to break down the UN. It's kind of complicated, but the way this was done in kind of a beautiful country ball form, I really enjoyed that. Yeah, I mean, this doesn't really seem like it's going to change much. Kind of feels like this is going to be set in their ways. It does kind of explain more of the motivations of BRICS. I mean, I've kind of known about those motivations. Everyone thinks BRICS is like a military alliance, but no, it's kind of just emerging economies, basically. This is, yeah, UN definitely does kind of have a certain leaning towards one way. It's going to be interesting to see the geopolitical shifts that happen as we enter into the next century. Obviously, we have 75 years before that moment, but things could change, especially because we are in different times. You know, UN after World War II, mostly like Cold War, then post-Cold War times. We're now kind of in a world that's not just completely led by the US. We have a lot of different regional powers and spheres of influence. So I'd imagine the UN is going to do quite a lot of shifts in the next, 75 years. We probably won't even need to wait to the next century before we see some drastic changes over there. But we'll see. Big old thanks to my patrons over at Patreon. I'm out here calling bro a history expert. Tambre, Drew's Argentinian Trust Fund, NordTyrol, Nolan, Miglu the Goat, LuxembourgLover, KirinoIsBestGirl, KingBearHaze, Fredrik Tibblin, DOOCHBAGGINS, Pavlik, Carmel Saida, AlexandertheTerrible. If you'd like your name here, check out that link in the description down below to patreon.com.